Hello there, I am Scott Telek, author of The Swithin, the Arthurian book series that will make everything alright. And we're continuing our reading of Sir Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur, and Arthur is just about to find out who his real parents are, so let's get to it. Right so came Ulfius and said openly that the king and all might hear that were feasted that day. You are the falsest lady of the world and the most traitorous to the king's person. Beware, said Arthur, what you say. You speak a great word. I am well aware, said Ulfius, what I speak, and here is my glove to prove it upon any man that will say the contrary, that this Queen Igraine is causer of your great damage and of your great war. For an she would have uttered it in the life of King Uther Pendragon of the birth of you and how you were begotten, you had never had the mortal wars that you have had. For the best part of your barons of your realm knew never whose son you were, nor of whom you were begotten, and she that bore you of her body should have made it known openly in excusing of her worship and yours, and in likewise to all the realm. Wherefore I prove her false to God and to you and to all your realm, and who will say the contrary, I will prove it on his body. Then spoke Igraine and said, I am a woman, and I may not fight, but rather than I be dishonored, there would some good man to take my quarrel. More, she said, Merlin knows well, and you, Sir Ulfius, how King Uther came to me in the castle of Tintagel in the likeness of my lord that was dead 3 hours tofore, and thereby begat a child that night upon me. And after the 13th day King Uther wedded me, and by his commandment when the child was born it was delivered unto Merlin and nourished by him. And so I saw the child never after, nor knew what is his name, for I knew him never yet. And there Ulfius said to the queen, Merlin is more to blame than you. Well I knew, said the queen, that I bare a child by my lord King Uther, but I knew not where he is become. Then Merlin took the king by the hand, saying, This is your mother. And therewith Sir Ector bore witness to how he nourished him by Uther's commandment. And therewith King Arthur took his mother, Queen Igraine, in his arms and kissed her, and either wept on the other. And then the king let make a feast that lasted 8 days. So now we get right into Igraine's visit and Arthur finding out who his birth parents were. And the first thing we hear is for Ulfius to accuse or impeach Igraine of being the falsest lady in the world and the most traitorous to his person. So this is kind of out of nowhere, right? And Arthur rightly says, hey, you better watch what you're saying, man. And Ulfius says, I know what I'm saying, and explains why he blames Igraine. That if she had told everyone Arthur was her son way back in the day, we never would have had these wars and lost all the good knights they've lost so far. Now Igraine says, I'm a woman and I cannot fight, but instead of being dishonored, some good man would take my fight for me. Now, interesting thing to say. First, there are very few times in the Arthurian legend where anyone specifically calls out the restricted place that women have in society. Second, her saying, I'm a woman and I can't fight implies that she would fight him if she could. She's also quite confident that someone, some good man, would take up her fight, and overall her response is a very confident air, so she really comes off as regal and assured. As I write my books, I kind of have to look at the small little details to try to tease out what kind of characters these people would have. And this statement was a big key to unlocking my characterization of Igraine as someone very strong-willed who's simply overpowered by circumstances and certain devious wizards. But she's not done. She says, Merlin knows, and you know, Ulfius, how Uther came to me looking like my husband and gave me this child, then told me to give it to Merlin the moment it was born, and I never saw the kid or even knew his name until now. So Ulfius backs down and admits that Merlin is more to blame than Igraine. So, powerful moment. And this is the last time Ulfius appears in the story. He's gone after this. So if you only read Morte d'Arthur, this is Ulfius's big moment. If you read the Vulgate, you know how influential Ulfius is and his whole history with Uther. And personally, I just liked Ulfius so much as a character that I gave him a big part in book 5 of my series, which is mostly my own invention, knowing that we would have to leave him in the story here. So, goodbye, Ulfius. But why does Ulfius accuse her? If we take him at his word, we have to believe that he thought she knew Arthur was his child all along. Now we know that in Le Morte d'Arthur, Uther told Igraine it was him in disguise, but she still had to give the baby away immediately and didn't know his name was Arthur. I think ultimately this is just here to demonstrate Ulfius' faithfulness to Arthur, and especially his buddy Uther. Anyway, they blame Merlin, and you see as a narrative device, it's easy to blame Merlin because he's all powerful and he kind of just does whatever he wants anyway. Then Merlin leads Arthur over to Igraine, and they wept upon each other. In the Vulgate, it says that she weeps with joy and tenderness, and it's like, really? Igraine was tricked into having sex with a man she hates, tricked into burying his child that was taken from her, and then forced to marry this guy who did all this to her, and now she meets the son she bore, and it's all just like, great? We'll just let bygones be bygones then? By the way, in Le Morte d'Arthur and in the Vulgate, this is the last we ever see or hear of Igraine. So, bye-bye, mother of King Arthur, don't need you anymore. Boop! Then on a day there came in the court a squire on horseback, leading a knight before him, wounded to the death, and told him how there was a knight in the forest had reared up a pavilion by a well. He hath slain my master, a good knight. His name was Miles. Wherefore I beseech you that my master may be buried, and that some knight may revenge my master's death. Then the noise was great of that knight's death in the court, and every man said his advice. Then came Griflet that was but a squire, and he was but young, of the age of the King Arthur. So he besought the king for all his service that he had done him to give him the order of knighthood. So a squire comes in. We later find out it's this fellow named Griflet, who's been mentioned before in the battle. The knight he served, named Miles, who we've never heard of before, has been killed by a knight at a fountain. One thing to watch for in Le Morte d'Arthur is characters who are introduced a while before we find out what their name is or what their whole deal is. But since the majority of this scene goes down in the next chapter, we're going to pick it up there. Okay, see you later. Hey there, I've made a separate video in which I do a reading of this scene from my book Gifts with Hard Swords, so now that you've read it in Le Morte d'Arthur, you can see how I handle it and translate it into my own book series. So there'll be a link at the end of this video, or you can find one in the comments below.